Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Level Up with Laksh. I'm here joined by Kambez Niaz. He's a partner here at Kingston Ross Pasnak LLP. It's also a firm that I'm interning at. And this episode is quite special because it's my first time bringing on a guest. And Kambez is really well diverse into the accounting profession, and he's here to share some wisdom with us. Kambez, how are you?
I'm great. I didn't know I was your first guest, so I feel awesome being the
Yeah,
inaugural guest.
absolutely. Quite some pressure on me, but we'll do good.
Wonderful.
Awesome. So, Kambez, you're at a cocktail party, you're at a networking event. How do you introduce yourself? Who is Kambez?
Good question. Obviously, say my name, Kambez Niaz, partner at Kingston Ross Pasnak. And then the question always develops into, well, what exactly do you do as a partner? And the answer has many different answers. But what I like to say is I just help entrepreneurs solve their problems
Wonderful.
and help their business enhance in any way that I can.
Absolutely. And, you've had quite the trajectory, especially since you've joined KRP. You've been here for 13, 14 years. You've worked your way up from an articling student all the way up to a partner and in a record-breaking time as well, right?
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's been kind of like your career trajectory and the things that you've been able to develop in your career and see, especially at KRP, but in general in the accounting profession?
Yeah, good question. So, kind of backing up to my way of getting to where I am now. I started with KRP mainly because I wanted to work with an independent firm. And
Yeah.
at the time when I joined, I think it was less than 80 people at the firm. Now we
Wow.
are north of 200 people. So we've seen tremendous growth. And in that time, I get to see wonderful students and co-ops and associates, just like yourself,
Thank you.
come through the door and they bring a fresh wave of new energy. So that part of the practice was always interesting to me in the accounting profession. Um, I see the accounting world evolving, kind of like we talked about before, with different technologies coming in, new generations coming in, new ideas being brought forward. So I think it keeps the profession always young to some extent, and it keeps
Yeah.
our firm actually really young. Because as you notice that, because this new student pool is always coming in at a young age, it's really bringing down the average age of the firm, and we get to connect with a lot of youth and see their new ideas. One of the things that makes KRP special, I believe, is that we're open to listening to everybody's ideas. And we're flexible and nimble enough to integrate things that do make sense to us, and then obviously drop things that maybe aren't working out as well. We at the partner table get to make the important decisions. So we can make those decisions quite rapidly. And we meet every month at minimum. So the decision making process is accelerated, right?
Absolutely.
And we always discuss things at our forefront: what's good for business, what's good for our staff, and what's great for morale. So we do take employee morale quite seriously here, because if you enjoy coming here and have good vibes in theory, it makes everybody around you work harder and enjoy their job more. In respect to what I'm seeing you said in the accounting industry as a whole.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So in the last few years, kind of talking to some of the folks at universities, the enrollment into the accounting field did drop.
Yeah.
And I don't exactly know the reason, but maybe because, the generation seeing that there's other ways to make money in this world. Granted, social media has, I think, really contaminated to some extent that notion. And I think people think that they can make money by doing TikToks or being an influencer, there's nothing wrong with that. That in itself is now becoming a new competitive landscape and a new whole marketing branch for many institutions.
Right.
And because of that, I think the stereotypical thought of an accountant being a bean counter really deters a lot of people from joining the profession. In the recent years, I think that now has flipped. The number of students entering the accounting designation has increased significantly.
Yeah.
And the CPA program itself has evolved too over the years that I've been a part of. So when I wrote the exam, I got my CA back in the day. So
Right.
there was no CPA. That was prior to all the designation converging into a single one. I got my CA and I had to write a UFE exam, which was the unified exam at the time. And that obviously is just dinosaur talk, because there is no CA now, there is no UFE. The program's evolved into a CPA designation. And I'm hearing rumblings that the examination is also going to evolve even further, where there's going to be different levels, similar to a CFA structure,
Right.
that CPA candidates can basically entertain. Not only that, they're now creating different routes for different students as well. And you probably know more about this than me, being kind of in the academia world, where you can follow a tax path. or an assurance path. You're not necessarily having to be married to the audit path. That was the path that we all took as part of public practice in the past.
Right.
Not to mention, actually, the bigger caveat too is, in order to get your letters and get your hours, back in the day, you had to go through a public firm.
Yeah.
So you had to pay your dues of 3 years of grind work in order to show the world that you're capable, and then you go out in the world and either join industry or you stay in public practice. Now you can get those hours working in industry, which is, I think, a significant change and shift in our industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was a statistic floating around a while ago. I'm not too sure how relevant it is today, but the American Institute of CPA stated that in the next 15 years, 75% of CPAs would end up retiring. Again, don't know how well this holds true, but a large part is that people would end up deterring away from accounting because, as you pointed out, people think you're a bean counter, right? It's, objectively, it might be a less glamorous career than doing TikTok or some of the online social medias. And I'm glad that the program itself, but also firms like KRP, they're very diving into bringing in the young energy, but also seeing how you can leverage the young people as well, right? Because at the end of the day, we're the generation that's the most closely related to AI. We've seen it for sometimes even 20% of our lifespan by now. So really kind of jumping into that young energy is, I think, where the accounting industry especially is going to evolve. Yeah, I think you mentioned at the start where when you introduce yourself, you were primarily a problem solver helping businesses. When people think of an accountant, they'll typically think of, I need my financial statements made, or how much money do I owe in taxes? And granted, those are two problems that do need solving. But when you get to a partner level, what other problems do you think clients end up facing? And how do you as a partner go about solving them?
That's a good question. So I think that's what makes the partner, even the manager level, interesting in our business. You don't really know what problems are going to come your way and what kind of problems you can anticipate. And every day is kind of unique from that perspective. So the first thing you touched on is needing financial statements and tax returns. So really what we're talking about here is compliance work. So compliance work is needed, it's necessary, and it's kind of the bread and butter of most firms. So obviously we will do that. That's kind of the ground level. Beyond the compliance side of things, what I like to do, and it kind of varies between partners and firms, etc., is, okay, now we got this data, we got these numbers, let's identify things that the client would want to talk about or the client would be concerned about. Or another way to look at it is, if this was my company, what would I care about in these financial statements, in the structure, in these tax filings, right? There's certain things you can do to make your life a little bit easier, perhaps save tax in some areas, defer tax in other ways. We could do a reorganization, bring in a family trust, consider holding companies, consider succession planning, estate planning, etc., etc., etc. Everybody has a unique circumstance and everybody has a unique business. Not to mention the business itself may be in a different lifespan of its own. Like, are we talking about a startup company that has XYZ problems? Are we talking about a growing company that is looking to obtain capital? Are we talking about a mature company that has kind of a constant cash flow and it's a cash cow of business, and they maybe are hitting a plateau because they don't know how to further enhance? So the growth company may be looking at getting more financing to expand. A mature company may be looking at acquisitions to seeing if they can bolt on another business or a sub in order to grow. And then, of course, there's companies that call it on the decline of the arch, and those are folks that are looking to retire. So now we're talking about succession planning.
Right.
Are your kids ready to take over that business? No? Okay. Can we look at third parties? Would you want to sell to an outsider? And what does that look like? It is a strategic sell, or is it a completely separate, party coming in? Could be private equity, could be numerous different things. So because of where you are in your life cycle, you would have a different style of problems as well.
Right.
In respect to what advisory work I would be giving to a client, it's a loaded question because there's thousands of problems that the client may have. Yeah. I can give you maybe the most recent 3 examples that I've been dealing with.
That'd be great.
One is, I'm dealing with a client right now, and they have an employee who they have an interest in keeping involved and interested in the company. The employee is not quite ready to take equity stake in the business because we talked about the employee having to actually put skin in the game by putting in capital and buying some of the shares from the existing owners.
Right.
The current employee doesn't want to do that yet, but they are probably 2 years away from doing that. As a result, what we've done is we've came up with a bonus structure calculation. So every quarter we look at the numbers and we normalize the numbers. We put in some contingencies, realizing that obviously the numbers are somewhat raw. They're not cleaned up as they would be at year end. And then I help determine the bonus that then our client would pay to this star employee. And the bonus currently is what's keeping this star employee very interested. And that's a quarterly payment. So that is one problem that we solved recently. But, and maybe I'll just hone in on just that one client because there's obviously a number of clients with different problems.
Yeah.
One of the other things we talked about is they don't actually have a formal agreement in place for this bonus calculation. And there's pros and cons, obviously, to this particular issue. From the client's perspective, because they don't have a formal document written up, there isn't a rigid calculation that requires to be made that they would be held accountable for, to which the employee could then demand a recalculation, maybe demand a potential audit, or there might be some sort of legal proceedings because there's a formal contract in place that requires certain things to be met in order for the calculation to be determined. So obviously there's that part of the risk kind of is floating around. And yeah, I guess that's really the main one. The other stuff I was going to mention maybe is more sensitive, so maybe we'll keep that off the call.
For sure. It's like it never happened.
Yeah.
What I really got from what you said is that people will think of an accountant as a 2-week situation out of the 52 weeks in a year where they'll give them a bunch of bank statements, etc., right? Or maybe even, call for a problem that needs to be solved. Accountant will do their work and then off with the day, right? But from what I'm hearing, I think what you're saying is a really good accountant is almost like a second CEO for the client, where you're not just helping them with one individual problem, you're coaching them throughout their overall business journey, right? If a client engages you as a partner, and let's say if there's a brand new startup, right? What would make you really invaluable to that client is being able to coach them through the startup phase, being able to get them to a mature business, kind of a cash cow production phase. And over the course of, 10, 20 years, however you plan on being a partner, et cetera, or however they plan on running the company, right? Whenever they want to sell or decline, et cetera, you'd be helping them with succession. So it's not just people, I think, will get the misconception where an accountant isn't just 2 weeks out of the year. It's your overall entire business. It's all the advisory that goes into it. And problems are, I think, good in a business, right? If you have problems, it means there's stuff worth fighting for. And when you have problems, it's nice to be able to have someone who has multiple years of expertise, not only through practical work, but also through the education, because CP is a very rigorous program, to be able to guide you through it. And going into kind of the practicality of work, you've mentioned all these different problems you solved, for example, coming up with that bonus structure, right? Doesn't sound like so far anything that I've learned in school, right?
Okay, yeah.
How do you think the education differs from especially what you've built up in the past 13 years of work in? I think the practical life and the real world examples are drastically different. Like, sure, the debits and credit theory all will line up at some point, but question one is, what kind of structures or situations have you encountered over 13 years where it's just like it's way different from school? And the point of asking this question is the college kids who are listening to this video, you can kind of start to think about what kind of things school isn't necessarily exposing me to that I could start getting at a younger age. So like what school is missing. And number two, how you would kind of go about learning this while maybe still in college. Just if you're ambitious out there and you want to kind of get a head start on building some of this practical kind of situational analysis.
Good question. And I've thought about that question a lot too in the past. So school is designed, your academia, your faculty is designed to teach you technical skills, which are critical to this particular role and particular profession. You have to know the technical before you go out and speak to individuals, because you obviously want to give sound advice, and they want to know that you know what you're talking about.
The reputation part of it.
Well, absolutely. The stuff that you don't learn in school, this is something that we actually honed in at KRP, and we have a separate training that we provide to our staff. And exactly what you just asked me is where this entire training was born from. The things that you don't really learn in school are soft skills,
right,
and how to be a professional. So those two things are really evolved and developed when you join a firm and you get a mentor and then you have experiences. But we realize that, in this new evolving world too, with a lot of people working from home, hybrid work environment, or you have remote employees, etc., it's hard to always have that perfect culture where you can look to a mentor down the hallway and say, okay, he or she is doing certain things a certain way, I will mimic it. It's becoming more difficult. So we put out a training for that. And what that training encompassed, and this is obviously not the whole list, but let's talk about your soft skills, okay? So if one is, how do you present yourself? Your presentation is critical, right?
Yeah.
What attire are you wearing? Are you showing up to work in shorts and flip-flops because, human resources says dress for your day? If that message was given to you, are you really taking advantage of it? Because remember, there's always flexibility provided, but you just have to be careful not to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
So one is, how do you dress? Two is, how do you communicate? Are you using slang when you're talking to professionals? Are you treating them like your buddy that you're just having a beer with? Or have you elevated your communication skill in order to show them that you are a professional and they are a professional and this is a professional setting, right?
Right.
So communication is critical. The way you appear is critical. And then even certain things that we talk about would be, how do you deal in the networking event, right? So you enter a room, there's a bunch of strangers, a bunch of professionals you never met before. What would you do? Are you uncomfortable? Does your uncomfortableness show, right? There's certain little things you can do as far as, entering maybe a group conversation or bringing what we call a four-legged marketing, where you bring a friend with you to that event, and then you go and try and make a connection. And then the things that we talk about and coach at these things is, when you make a connection, it's more important to make one meaningful connection in that room as opposed to trying to meet 1,000 people and you can remember their name, right? Then after you do meet somebody, whether it's a networking event or on the street or even a partner, what is your follow-up after that, right? Are you going to add them on LinkedIn? Are you going to send them an email or a note saying, thank you for your time? Because at the end of the day, you do meet a lot of professionals. You meet a lot of entrepreneurs. Time is valuable. So they are making time in order to sit down with you, right? Or to talk to you. So you have to appreciate their time. And vice versa, maybe one day when you are in their shoes, you hope that somebody that's coming through the ranks is appreciating your time and vice versa, right?
Absolutely.
So really it comes to the soft skills. That's the biggest one. And two is how to be a professional.
For sure, yeah.
Those are the two things you kind of learn through experience, but it's not necessarily taught in school.
Yeah, and people will assume that accounting is just a desk job and they'll totally just tune out any soft skills out of it. But, I've been working here for 4.5 months and I've just seen that communication is truly the forefront of what you end up doing, right? If you have poor communication, it's going to not only eat up a lot of time that could have been spent, bettering a client's file or their finances, etc. But it's also just, it's also a situation where if you have the clear-cut communication, the managers, the partners, right, they're able to truly understand the full picture of what's going on and be able to provide the actual valuable advice that the client needs, right? When you have muddy communication, you're going to have situations that aren't necessarily the clearest. And, all the college students who are listening, everyone is determined to get those internships and everything, but you cannot get them without going to these networking events, and you cannot succeed at a networking event without practicing these soft skills. And I think personally one of the best ways to practice the soft skills is it's just a numbers game at the end of the day, right? If you attend your first networking event, it might not go the greatest, right? You might butcher up some words. You might not necessarily have the smoothest flowing conversation with someone. You go to the second one, it'll be a bit better. Third one, a bit better, right? And eventually, 10 networking events in, you'll have landed yourself an internship, right? And then you will be able to get that practical experience that you were hoping for that school wouldn't have ended up providing you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think are some of the biggest mindset shifts from, a junior or just a new person into the industry versus working your way up to a partner? We've touched on problem solving and how partners kind of have to think about the bigger picture side of things, whereas juniors will be focusing on one element of that big picture. But in terms of just, mindset and all that jazz, what do you think has evolved since your transition from a junior to a partner?
Yeah. So at a junior level, I think when you enter the firm, your job is really just to be a sponge. You want to absorb as much information as you possibly can. That includes technical and the soft skills that we talked about.
Right.
You're going to be rewarded with work, and you're going to be put on different projects, and you're going to have different managers and seniors that you're dealing with. So it's important to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. As you get better and you progress in your role from a junior side of things, the amount of responsibility also begins to shift. So now you're no longer a junior associate, you're now reached a senior associate level. And at a senior associate level, you are in charge of the entire file from start to finish. So now the file has really become your responsibility. So as you gain that technical skill, as you gain trust working with other staff around you and including partners, you will start to become elevated, because naturally you're just getting better and better and better at your job, right? The step up from a senior would then be a manager role. And I'm kind of giving you a shortcut. There's so much more to it, but it's a very, very high level.
Absolutely.
At a manager level, the way I like to explain that metaphor is a manager to me is like a project manager, right? So they may have different projects. They have a number of different projects on the go, and they may have a general contractor that's involved in every single project, and that would be the senior accountant.
Right.
Think of every junior as almost like a tradesperson. So your job is to do the job on time, on budget, and the file has to be done well. At a manager level, though, because you're not necessarily always on the tools, you can manage multiple jobs or multiple engagements at the same time, and you got to make sure that they're all working together. The manager level is one of the more difficult levels, I would say, at the firm, given that you're giving feedback down, but you're also receiving feedback from the partner level. And on top of it, you're trying to keep all of these balls in the air.
Yeah.
It sounds hectic, it sounds really difficult, but our managers are superstars, so they can handle it, because obviously with time you get better and better. You learn efficiencies. There's tips and tricks that make your life a lot easier. Like, even, we're not going to get granular there, but like managing like your inbox, email inbox as an example, right? Things like that can really get away from you. So the managers do a really good job of making sure that all of those files are progressing along, and keeping the client happy and informed, and keeping the partner happy and informed as well on the engagement. At the partner level, really our job is risk mitigation, right? Risk is probably the number one priority. So when we review the files, when they hit our desk, we look at it at a higher level and say, where could things go wrong in this particular file? And that's the areas we like to hone in, right? Probably less concerned about a prepaid expense at $100 and more concerned about $500,000 of deferred revenue or something like that, just as a hypothetical.
Right.
Two is customer relations and customer service as at the forefront of a partner level, right? We're not in the business of getting fired from our clients, so we got to keep our clients happy, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, we need to show them that we're adding value to the work that we're doing, right? So we talked about doing the advisory work and the compliance work, but we got to make sure that it's done on time to their standard, and we're adding something that they didn't think of before or know about before. Right? I can't tell you the number of times that we have, basically have earned our fee twofold or threefold by doing things for our clients where they're like, oh my God, I did not know about this, or I didn't think about that.
Right.
And that's where the partner level really evolves. And as far as problem solving, so like I said, outside of compliance work, once that's kind of taken care of, if the client calls and says, hey, I want to go and buy this other company, let's talk about that. That's a new conversation. And I can give you a real life example. I had a client that he's a realtor, a successful realtor, and he realized that a lot of his work was really evenings and weekends. So he was looking to acquire a business where he could do a little bit of desk work during the day, and that would allow him to earn a little bit more income and maybe take a step back from some of the work that was done on weekends, right? Because obviously, as a realtor, your schedule is post regular people's workday schedule, because that's when they can look at properties.
For sure.
He forwarded me some information of a potential acquisition. He sent me his letter of intent and the financial statements, and he was basically on the 11th hour and ready to cut the check. I told him, okay, hold on, give me a minute. Let me look at it and do a high level financial level due diligence, right? Let's see what the numbers look like and see what the numbers tell me, right? Instantly we realized, or I guess I realized and communicated to the client, and then he came to that realization as well, is that this business was the asking price was overvalued, significantly overvalued based on the numbers that they were providing us. Two, from the business standpoint, one of the things that you didn't consider is the staff that have been hired to work in that particular company, and I don't want to say the company too much.
Oh, absolutely.
The workers that were hired in that particular company weren't necessarily the most reliable people, and they really required to be handheld and babysat to some extent in order for them to complete the work that they were doing. So I understood my client, the realtor client, his intention was to buy a company that was hopefully low maintenance and you could just do on the side and make a little bit more money. Quickly, I told him, like, hey, this is not going to be the low maintenance company you think it is. This is actually going to require a lot more of your firepower in order to schedule, keep on top of these guys, make sure they go to the different sites and do their job, and they return and give you proper documentation for all the work that they did.
Wow.
Right? So I'm like, you really are just buying yourself another job at this point. And the third and probably the most important thing is we realized all of the relationships in the company that he was about to buy is with the previous owner. Okay, so the previous owner wanted to retire and step back, but he had a lot of verbal contracts with a lot of the businesses that that company was servicing. So there wasn't really any tangible that you were buying. There wasn't a customer list. There wasn't any contracts. So the risk was the moment that gentleman retires, all of your work could probably retire with him. So now you're going to pay a lot of money for a company that in theory may have no value other than you're just babysitting a bunch of employees who sound to be pretty difficult. So just by having those conversations, effectively, I talked him out of buying that company because it didn't fit his lifestyle. And two, the valuation didn't make a whole lot of sense. And this is just advisory work without even getting too granular, right? Because if we actually wanted to elevate that and take that to the next step, we would get a formal valuation done, and we have separate departments at the firm that can do that, and then go down that path, or even do formal due diligence on the M&A side, et cetera, et cetera. So that's more of the technical conversation.
Yeah, and with the partner level, you're connecting a lot of dots for people as well, because you end up being, in a way, the face of the firm, and you have all these kind of stakeholders that you're dealing with, whether it be, just clients of the firm or other connections that you need to develop being a partner. It's nice when you have a client come in and say, I need this done, right? So you have 5 other people who can help them out. And, going back to what you said, what you do at a junior level versus a senior associate, manager, principal, senior manager to a partner level, right? I think a point that I would personally like to stress is if you are, young and you're listening to this, you might want to immediately start doing the things that a manager doing is and partner is doing, right? But I think especially it's important you put in your time, and it's important you try not to jump too many stairs at once. It's important you kind of build a solid foundation at every single level. And it doesn't mean you should not try out the things, right? Like if you have some, piece of advisory that you can give to a client as a junior, by all means go for it, right? Run it by someone. But I think it's especially important to build solid foundations such that you always have something strong to fall back on. And you end up building that credibility along the way as well, external to the firm and internal to the firm. Because you can prove to people and you can tell people that you are someone who can get stuff done, and you can do it at any level, and you are good at that level, at whatever level it may be.
Yeah, and to your point, I think one of the things we do encourage is if you are a junior on the file, it doesn't mean you don't have a voice.
Absolutely.
So if you notice things as far as planning or even doing things more efficiently in the file, you could flag it for your senior, you could flag it to the manager, or you can even flag it to the partner if you choose. And then we would consider and say, yeah, that totally makes sense. Let's do that. Or, this is why this is not a good idea, and here's why, X, Y, Z. But we would appreciate the fact that you're thinking outside the general bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's always good to punch above your weight class. So I wanted to talk to you kind of for all the businesses that are listening out there, right? Something that I hear a lot of people saying is that when you're an accountant who deals particularly in tax, it can be easier to prove your utility to the client, right? Where you prepare the tax return and you can tell them, hey, I saved you $20,000. I'm going to charge $5,000, etc., right? And the client will be like, oh yeah, you know what? Like I'm still 15 in the green, right?
Sure.
With audit and assurance, and some of your LinkedIn posts have mentioned this, where businesses kind of just view it as something the banks will require, right? Or something that other stakeholders will require. What is it that you have to say about why audit and assurance is still incredibly relevant and still perhaps one of the most important legworks and kind of verticals that accounting has as an industry? Why is A&A something that businesses should pay for and something that they should not take lightly? They should take very seriously.
Yeah, so really to hopefully oversimplify it for the sake of this conversation, there's 3 levels of general assurance work that's available. So at a compilation level, really the goal of bringing in a CPA would be making sure that your numbers and accounting is correct, and then it's accurate enough for a tax filing. And that's where more things could trickle out of based on what we identify when we do the work. A review engagement is kind of the mid-tier assurance level being provided. And typically that's required by a bank who provides you with capital. The reason review engagements are prevalent is you are getting a third-party opinion from an independent accountant reviewing your financial statements. So it gives the bank or any other user of the financial statements a level of comfort that A, your financial statements are in accordance with the financial framework that you're using, whether it's accounting standards for private enterprise or maybe IFRS. And two is that there is a letterhead and a firm that says, yes, we looked at these accounts based on our risk profile criteria, materiality, et cetera, in accordance with the review standards. And we have signed off and here's our report. So now the bank can use this, and the bank will use it to calculate the financial covenants, debt service coverage ratio, et cetera, because now that they can rely on these numbers, they can determine internally the risk profile of this company who has their capital effectively and their ability to repay it back, right? So that's really the bank's concern if we're just talking about the bank as a user of the financial statements. When you elevate to the highest level, which is audited financial statements, well, now we are looking in a more robust way at the financial statements and looking at things like controls, the overall risk profile, other inherent risks that might be prevalent to the company. We follow auditing standards, right? Canadian auditing standards for all of the work that we do. We'll get more granular and test certain accounts and invoices and revenues, et cetera, et cetera. That is the highest level of assurance that you can get on these financial statements. And the users of those financial statements would have the most level of comfort over these numbers. There might be various reasons as to why you need audited financial statements. Banks could also request them. One that kind of pops out to me immediately would be something like a charity. So a charity would probably require, the board would probably require financial statements to be audited because they're dealing with external capital. Right? They're dealing with donors, they're dealing with sponsors, they're dealing with many users and stakeholders that are involved in this organization, and they cannot risk, certain things maybe going sideways on the financial side, and they would opt to have audited financial statements done for that particular reason. So for those reasons, I think it's critical to have your financial statements looked at the three different tiers that we talked about. And you're tapping into the skill set and expertise of a CPA who has taken a number of years to get to the designation and the level of expertise that they have to offer. So it's hard for a business owner to tap into that kind of level of access by doing things in-house without them, right? And I always urge the entrepreneurs and business owners that I deal with is go and make money for the company. That's your number one goal. Right?
Maximize shareholder value.
Absolutely. Focus on that. Make sure your company grows. And then this other stuff that we're dealing with, that's where we can come in and add value and help out. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, you want your business to grow, right? And one of the best ways to make your business grow is, well, number one, you got to inject capital, whether it be debt funding or equity funding. You need people to be able to trust your business. They need to have assurance that your business is viable and it's actually a going concern, something worth investing into. And A&A takes care of the whole growth side of things. I think tax will come at the very end when you want to see how much money you want to kind of leave on the table, etc. Right? But A&A, I think it's especially overlooked at, especially when I'm talking to all these students at various classes of mine or other firms, etc. Right? That whole kind of utility portion, I think they undermine just how valuable A&A can get. And when you kind of talk from a business owner perspective, you can see just how viable it is. Speaking of which, you're a business owner as well, right?
Right.
You have pharmacies that you handle. There's breweries, real estate as well, I think, right? So, how do you think your knowledge of accounting has helped you be a successful business owner, or at least in those ventures?
Yeah, so to answer that question, I think I have to take a step back. So when I was in university, one of the things I wanted to do is I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But an entrepreneur is a fancy way of saying unemployed, because until you have a business, you really have nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know what that business was going to be. right? So, but I knew that I needed to do something with my bachelor's of commerce to get a job, to get my feet wet, to get some business expertise and knowledge,
Yeah.
so then I can go and apply it to the real world. Accounting to me was basically the backbone of every business, right? So I said, okay, well, let me understand accounting. Let me understand how finances work, how capital moves around, what financial statements even tell me, because I knew one day that would be an important skill to have. If I am going to review financial statements of a potential company I want to buy, I got to know what I'm reading, right?
Absolutely.
You can pay lawyers to read it for you, but I mean, it'd be cheaper if you just write it yourself.
For sure.
So that's kind of how I went down the accounting path of the world. Then the beauty of being in a firm like ARP and having access to, like you said, mid-sized clients, if you will, is we handle the files from cradle to grave. And because of that, I can see exactly how a particular company in a particular industry with certain management and ownership can do dealings with the dealings that they deal with, right?
Yeah.
So I got to now have access to this newfound data, if you will, and I can see, okay, well, what I thought was a lucrative business may not be so much, or maybe this company is struggling. I wonder what happened there, and then you learn, okay, there's more to the business world than just the business itself, right? What matters is, okay, one is, what is your product or service? Okay, is there demand for it? Two is, how strong is your brand, right? We talked about reputational risk. Okay, well, do people actually want to deal with your company? Do people call you? Do people know you, right? Three is, how strong is your management? Because management team does matter, right? If you have strong intellectual people at that table, they can make certain decisions and pivot certain ways to put your company on top, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're looking at it from an investor lens as an entrepreneur, the last one is probably margin. And that would be, at what price am I getting this company? Right? If I'm going to do a formal, informal valuation on the back of a napkin, I know this company's making $10,000 a year of EBITDA, but they want to sell it to me for $1 million. I should know that this is not right. Right?
Yeah,
Things
not
like
a good
that.
deal.
Not a good deal. So anyway, being a partner here, going through the accounting world gave me a ton of skills, right? A ton of skills that I said, okay, one day I was now finally fortunate enough to apply to the real world, right? And the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to talk, but also walk the walk, right? It's great to give advice to people, but then you can always get challenged and say, well, have you ever done it? Or have you seen it in practice, etc.?
Yeah.
And I've seen it in practice done with other clients, but now I see it in practice done it with my own money, right? So that obviously changes the playing field quite a bit.
Yeah.
When it came to kind of the business ventures, my first business venture was we opened up a pharmacy. It was my sister and I. My sister was a pharmacist, and I had the CA background, so we partnered together and we opened up our first pharmacy.
Wow.
And there was a lot of learnings along the way, right? We were arrogant enough to start a pharmacy without necessarily having a medical clinic attached to us, which we quickly learned is the traditional model of a pharmacy, because that's how the prescriptions. That's right, exactly. That's where the funnel of work comes in. First few months, we made no money, and we instantly started to panic. We're like, oh my God, we took on something more than we can chew, right?
Yeah.
And, there was nonstop problems along the way, right? And it was really beyond even accounting. It was just real business problems that we had to deal with. But it gave me a whole other set of tools that now I can apply and add to my advisory component when I'm dealing with clients, right? So right now I have other pharmacy clients, and they speak to me because I know exactly what their struggles are because I went through the similar problems. So as an example, okay, let's talk about something that's a problem outside of accounting. Our HVAC needed to be approved by the city of Edmonton.
Yeah.
Okay. We were waiting for parts. They were on back order. And then when we finally got the parts, we were waiting on the city to come and approve it and give us the permits. Until we get the permits, we cannot open. And every day that we're not open, we're just bleeding cash.
Yeah.
So that is a business problem 101. Let's solve that one. Two is, what merchant provider do we want to use? You know those little tap machines where you tap your credit card, they take debits and credits?
Like Clover and stuff?
Well, absolutely. Clover is one of them. There's different merchants, and they all provide different fees depending on the volume of transactions and the type of cards you take. So we had to assess which one made the most sense and which one had the least downtime and which one was the most compatible with our POS system. So that takes research and time. Then there's, of course, the licensing from the college that you have to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. And after you've done all of that foundational work, you then have to go and say, Okay, is anyone walking through the door to actually buy our prescriptions or buy our drugs or buy our over-the-counter medication, right? That's another whole set of problems.
Yeah.
Luckily, knock on wood, we were able to create some partnerships with senior homes around us. They loved our service. We really became kind of their one go-to stop, and we were able to evolve the business over a span of a couple of years.
Right.
So the business finally started to get legs, started to get traction. Our brand started to grow. People started to learn our names in the area. We started to kind of dominate our area code a bit more.
Right.
And people starting to get to notice. People started to realize our brand. So then when we told people that, oh, we own this pharmacy, which I won't say the name, and I'll tell you why. We tell them, oh, we own this pharmacy. They're like, oh, great, like we know you guys, like so and so is using you guys, or I love this and I love that. The other thing that we pioneered too, we were one of the first pharmacies to get on Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes.
Wow.
As a pharmacy.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was pretty groundbreaking from that side. And it created new buzz, new revenue, and of course, new challenges, of course, with that as well.
Yeah.
The other thing that we were on the news for is we were the first walk-in pharmacist-driven clinic. So you could come in and see a medical practitioner and have access to one, and that happens to be a pharmacist. Because a pharmacist can prescribe you drugs, right? So huge competitive advantage there, because one of the things in the medical field, and now we're talking about industry-specific risks, and sorry, I'm blabbering on here.
No, absolutely.
Industry-specific risk is that we in Canada have a hard time getting access to medical professionals.
Yeah.
Seeing a doctor is difficult. Even at a medical clinic, you're sitting there for an hour or two waiting to see somebody, right? Whereas a pharmacist is the most easily accessible medical practitioner that a lot of people don't know about or use. So we marketed ourselves as a pharmacist walk-in clinic. And then we did travel vaccinations, et cetera, et cetera. People loved it. So we started to get more and more business that way as well.
Wow.
So having done all of those over the last kind of 2 years, my sister was blessed enough to get pregnant with triplets.
Wow.
So she called me and she said, Kambez, what are we doing here? Like, are we going to continue this business? And I said, no, without you, I don't want to continue this, because I needed my partner in crime. And frankly, she had the technical skills of the actual pharmacy business. I was not a pharmacist.
Right.
So we went to the market and now tried to sell this company. And now that is a whole new array of, problems and, different things that came about. So now I am, in retrospect, looking back, now I'm getting M&A experience. Okay. Because I'm like, okay, we're selling a business. What does that look like? One of the things that was working against us was time, right? Because obviously my sister was going to be due, and we had only a few months to sell the business, and I didn't want to continue the business without her, because she was in many ways a face of the company. She had a lot of the relationships and stuff like that too, which obviously we could transition to another pharmacist, can't really transition to a CPA, right? Didn't make sense. So we did find an interested buyer. There was a couple buyers that kind of came and went. When we finally found an interested buyer, I almost had to do due diligence on both sides. So I would provide them with information, but I could tell that there were some gaps in the questions that they were asking me. So I would say, hey, I think you would also want to know this. I'm going to go ahead and send you that as well to save us both time. And they're like, oh yeah, that's great. We were going to ask that in the next batch of questions or whatever. I'm like, hey, sure, I don't have time for that kind of back and forth. Yeah. So anyway, we were able to close the deal, and then we had a successful exit from that company. And then not to kind of hijack this entire meeting, once that business was sold, my only business left was really KRP, which I loved doing, but I also wanted to scratch the itch and get back into the investment world, and that's where other business ventures came about.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's hopefully a long-winded way of answering your question.
That's one amazing story. Wow. I think, what I really resonated with that is, at the end of the day, you can break down any business or anything in your site really into a problem meeting a solution, right?
Yeah.
You want to get your message across to people across the world, right? This whole podcast setup is the solution, right? Yep. And with businesses, you're going to encounter many, many problems, and you need a good set of tools, right? And I think the CPA and the whole accounting, toolkits, I think it's one of the most important ones. At the end of the day, what I like to phrase myself is, I'm not an accountant, I'm a problem solver. My weapon of choice is accounting, right? I have other weapons, I call them AI, public speaking, marketing, podcasting, right? Mm-hmm. Each business and each individual problem I face will require a different ratio of these toolkits. If it's, a restaurant business, I might have to deal with some kind of bring in my marketing toolkit a bit, right? How to promote them around the block, right? Or if it's a very like service oriented business, kind of deal with a lot more of my maybe even marketing, right? It's a really important one as well. But all these toolkits, you need to apply a different ratio. And what makes accounting a really attractive toolkit is, at the end of the day, it is the architecture of any business. It's one of the most crucial pieces of blueprint, right? You can go to virtually any Fortune 500 company. You can look at their CEO, their CFO, and their COO. It's a very high chance that at least one of them will end up having a CPA background, right? And because of the versatility it provides, it increases the number of problems, but also the quality of problems which you're able to address. And another thing I got from your story is supply and demand, right? When you're the only one, or one of the only ones who's on Uber Eats, and one of the only ones who's a pharmacist, medical clinic, right? There's very other few people who can do the same things you do. So you can, you're in a very good spot. Demand will always come to you. And when you're a CPA and you're the only one who can use, a specific marketing toolkit paired with your accounting toolkit and your other investment toolkits, right? You become one of the only ones in the city.
Yeah.
And I've elaborated on this before in a different podcast, but the way I like to think about it is, hypothetically, there's a fictional city, there's 10,000 CPAs, right? Let's say naturally you've been good at school, you've been good at sports, etc., right? You tend to end up in the top 10% of things on average, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say you're in the top 10% of CPAs. That's 1,000 out of 10,000, right? There's 999 other people like you who can do the same things. There's 999 people who can, who are in competition essentially, right? And wherever the demand is, they have 1,000 options to choose from. And then you bring in another skill like marketing, right? And let's say you're in the top 10% of marketing. Well, 10 times 10 is 10% times 10% is 1%. So suddenly you drop from 1,000 out of 10,000 to 100 out of 10,000, right? So you infinitely cut the supply that you're in competing with also, but you make yourself more valuable to the client, right? And you bring in your third skill. And the intersection of all of that is eventually you'll be able to become a one-of-one situation, as in you're the only one who can offer what you can, right? I can't name of another CPA. If I'm ever, in the pharmacy business, you're like, kind of going to be the one that I'll end up going to, right?
Right.
And there's the brand part of it as well, but there's also that utilizing all the resources and kind of toolkits you have available to you, and phrasing them in a way where you are invaluable to the client, where they're willing to, money aside, they'll pay you whatever you want, but they'll also be happy doing it because of the sheer value that you'll be able to provide to them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's also important, I think, to not get too like spread out, but have some kind of focus, right? You can pair up 10 toolkits, sure, but then it's like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of situation. So it's a fine balance that's required, fine nuance, all that stuff.
But to your point, I think you should be curious. You should try a lot of things to figure out what you actually want to stick with.
Yeah.
So at the early onset, I think you will be trialing 10, 15 different things. And then eventually, like you were mentioning, you will hone in maybe at 2-3 things that you're really, really good at and you genuinely enjoy. And then hopefully you've shrunk the market where you're the only guy that can do X, Y, Z together. And you're really, really good at it because A, you have the experience, but B, because you enjoy it. Yeah. So then people will come to you. And then, money aside, I think what brings me a lot of joy dealing with clients and customers and everything else, it's really about seeing the client be happy, right? Seeing in their face that they're actually getting value of your advice, or getting a thank you, being like, oh, I didn't even think about that. You're awesome. Thank you for doing that. Yeah. That right there refills my battery. Absolutely. Right? That gets me out of bed in the morning because I'm like, I made a difference. And I and thinking about, doing things that you like or doing things that you care about, that's something I like and I do care about. Yeah. Right. So like I would do that. Honestly, I would probably do that for free. You know what I mean? I would just go and like try to help businesses because I'm like seeing the joy in your face because you just discovered something that helped your business a lot and now you're going to elevate brings me joy. And what I try to do is I'm a big cheerleader of all of my clients. Wow. Right. So when you do great, I feel like I'm doing great. So if I see your truck on the road, I'm like, hey, they got another truck. That's awesome. Like I get happy, even though I don't actually have any equity in your business. Yeah. I feel like I have emotional equity in your company. So that makes me very happy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you're able to alleviate that financial burden and financial stress of a business and you do what you do best, the business themselves can do what they do best. Right? Absolutely. So it's a win-win-win situation, triple win. Yeah. Now on to probably the most controversial situation in accounting, AI. People say it's going to take over your accounting job. We're all going to be left jobless, all that situation, right? I think it's just news in the headlines. I don't think it's all that situation, but I'm curious to hear your take on it. And because you were a relatively young partner, you've been able to experience all sides of it. 13 years ago, they didn't have AI. Now they do, but you've been able to delve yourself into the world of AI. And I want to hear your side of it.
For sure. I mean, technology change has always impacted the industry, always impacted the firm. I have some fellow partners, maybe dating them by saying the story, but they share stories with me about doing audits on paper, right? Having dial-up internet. And I can't even fathom that difficulty of having to do that and then having to make a change and flow it through another 15 sheets of paper. Like, forget it. I think that's when I exit as an auditor. I'm like, no, too much paperwork. So even in my role, when I joined the firm, we felt like we were technologically advanced, right? We use really good technology. We use stuff that helps us manage our files, but then helps us prepare certain reporting, certain financials. And then there's also added tools that help us with the auditing side, et cetera, et cetera. Since I've been part of the firm, we have evolved and have what we call, I think it's called an IT and AI committee. So this committee meets together and they look at things that are coming into the market that may be disruption to the market, and some tools that are useful and some that are just noise. And we have to figure out from those tools what makes the most sense.
Yeah.
I was also part of another committee previously. I'm not part of that anymore, but we helped integrate a tool into our current audit procedures that has made our life a lot easier. So the challenge with that integration per se was, okay, it's a great tool, but how does that make our life easier? And B, will our staff actually use it? And if they do use it, how do we roll it out, right? Do we roll it out in pieces? Do we only roll out certain functionalities and then add more and more and more? And then do we provide training? And if we do provide training, at what level do we provide it? Do we give it to the seniors, or do we give it to managers, or do partners even need to know how granular some of the software gets because they're not going to be using certain functionalities? So all of that's always part of the conversation.
Wow.
I think you have to adopt the evolving technology, and we can talk about AI specifically as well. You either adopt it or you be left behind.
Absolutely.
Right? You can't resist it and you can't fight it, right? And some of the conversations we had at the firm level and at the partner level, given that certain AI technology that's coming in is making some of the more granular data entry, kind of the simpler stuff a little bit easier for us. What that means is students coming out of university are actually coming in at a more elevated role. So what traditionally was seen as a junior associate, and really what you did was Tick and Bob, maybe you look at invoicing and vouching, maybe you do some data entry, it's probably no longer required of you because we have tools that can do that.
Yeah.
What's required of you is understanding how the tool works and making sure that the output from the tool is correct. Supervision, absolutely. So you're already coming in at a more elevated level.
Yeah.
That may scare certain students coming out of school, but to me, I see this as an opportunity that you don't have to deal with some of the low-level thinking anymore. You're asked to do some of the higher-level thinking.
Yeah.
And you're already coming into the profession a step ahead from where I was. You know what I'm saying? Like, you as a new junior associate are doing work at an elevated level compared to where I was as a junior associate when I entered the industry, and you're already a step ahead of me. So I think really where AI is going to evolve is what tools are available, how do we integrate it, right? And how do we empower our staff to use it at a more supervisory role, like you said, where they manage the output, as opposed to being feared that this tool is here to replace your job, which I don't think it's here to do that at all.
Yeah. Even historically, anytime new technology has been introduced, it has always made society far better off than any potential negatives. You know, hundreds of years ago, everyone on planet Earth was a farmer, and then tractors came around, and then the farmer population dropped to like 4%, right? And farming is very important, but then I would say it's a safe bet to say that overall, humanity as a species has been able to do greater things and create more value for the world, right? And then in the 1950s, etc., the internet came around. Many of the paper jobs that were done got laid off, right? A lot of layoffs were happening, but it's a safe bet to say that the internet created far more jobs than it took away. And some of those jobs, like, people had no idea would exist, right? Systems administrator, right? The entire KRP IT department. all these jobs are people. All these jobs are ones that people would not imagine have existed. And I think it's the same thing with AI. It might take away a few jobs in the short run, but it's going to create far more jobs that won't even exist. And the jobs that it will create will overall be able to provide a higher value not only to the firm but to the client as well, and will be more fulfilling, right? It'll take away the job of manually taking data out of a PDF and entering it into Excel. And I think that's a job that people will be happy is gone, right?
Yeah.
The job that it'll end up creating is making sure the supervision is correct, right? What it actually means. What is the strategic business advice I can generate from the manual grunt work that was done for me?
Yeah.
And accounting is itself, I think, is an industry that is very hungry for all this AI stuff to come. If you look at computer science, there's tons of technological advancements every single day, right? Like it's almost like every other day they have something new going on. Or even the people now, you can vibe code a bunch of applications, right? They're making tools and efficiencies for a lot of other industries. And I think accounting is the one that people will overlook, which is why I'd say it's a very hungry industry for all this AI to come, right? And I think that's where also we have the responsibility to kind of be pioneers in this space, right? All these committees that we have at KRP kind of explore how we can bring all that to the table because we are hungry. We want what AI has to offer, and we want it to improve ourselves and provide that value.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. In regards to all of this AI stuff, is there anything that you're not a fan of in particular? That all the sentiment that's going around.
Yeah, I think the noise part of it,
Yeah.
right? I think obviously AI is a big hype. To some extent, there might be certain bubble tendencies associated with AI. It seems like a new tool, like you talked about computer sciences, but even in that technology space, there seems to be a new tool that's rolled out every day, and it's hard to keep up and know how much of it is real, how much of it is fluff. Because certain tools generally may have a lot of hype behind them, but they don't actually have the functionality or credibility that you need to do the work that you got to do, right? And even trying to figure out of the mainstream AI that are out there, it seems like every day one is trying to one up the other. So it's hard to keep up in making sure that you have the best tool available to you. And I'm talking about specifically like Gemini, ChatGPT, the Microsoft Copilot, and even Claude now that's being rolled out. And I'm sure there's students have even other ones that they're using. Hard to know which is the best because they're all slightly a little bit differently in their involvement. But really, I think going back to your original question is figuring out what's noise and what's real. That's the most difficult part.
Yeah, and people do tend to lean on the over exaggeration side of things.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that we haven't discussed in this podcast that you'd like to leave the audience with, kind of advice for a younger Kambez out there?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I think I would really stress is, take advantage of the time and energy that your mentor would spend with you, right? They provide you with invaluable advice. And I think maybe that's some of the advice that I took for granted when I was more junior and coming through the ranks. Because a lot of the times my attitude was like, yeah, whatever, this doesn't apply to me. Or, I'll figure it out on my own. I'll make my own mistakes. But, somebody like a Rob Heron here has been my mentor for a number of years. He's provided me with invaluable advice that helped me navigate the waters, go up the rankings, and get to where I am today. And a lot of the stuff that I'm sharing today was shared with me as well, as far as, be more professional, work on your soft skills, develop skills that differentiate you from competitors or others in the market, and ultimately find what makes you happy and go all into that area. So if you do have a mentor or access to a mentor, definitely take advantage of that and listen to the advice they have to give you, because it goes a long way, mainly because they made those mistakes from their own time. So they can pre-warn you about things that work and things that don't work.
When you learn from them, you double your learning.
Absolutely.
Awesome. This has been great, Kambez. Where can people learn more about what you do and more of your takes on the accounting industry, all of that stuff?
Where can they learn it, you said, sorry? I obviously my LinkedIn, I try to share some new information whenever I can. If you have specific questions, we obviously have a website. On there, you can reach out to us and contact us, and more than happy to help out wherever it makes sense. And I think LinkedIn would really be the best one.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. I hope you found value out of the episode. And thank you, Kambez, for your time and all the advice that you gave.
Thanks for having me.